Hey folks, in this episode of the podcast, we're speaking with ON1. This is TWiP. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I am your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today on the show, I have Dan Harlacher. We're going to be talking about ON1 Software. You may have heard of the company. They've been around for quite some time, but we're going to dive into a couple of things. We're going to talk about what the company is designed to do, what their main goal in life is, what's the purpose of the company. We're going to talk about some of the software that they put out for folks to create images from. And we're going to talk about, hopefully, I'm going to pry some of the future-facing things, if we can, out of Dan, see where things are going. Dan, welcome to This Week in Photo, man. How's it going?
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to show you guys what we got.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. This is really cool. It's been a long time coming getting you on the podcast. Thank you for doing this on a Friday afternoon, no less, and it's close to beer o'clock, right?
I know. I don't have a beer yet, so
you don't have a beer. Neither do I. I have a Coke over here. Yeah, so I'm excited to chat about this because it's I'm always excited to talk about things that help photographers exercise and do the things that they want to do. And it's so funny. You look at the world of imaging, and I've been in this game. I hate to put the rings on the tree, but I've been in this game since, let's say, a long time. Let's use Photoshop as the marker. I started using Photoshop in version 2. That was a version before layers, right? That was before layers showed up in version 3. And you guys are taking that ball and doing some amazing things with pushing pixels around. I want to start with an introduction to you first. Like Dan, who are you and what's your function at the company and what do you bring to the table for ON1? Let's start there.
Sure. Well, I'm Dan Harlacher. I'm currently the VP of product at ON1. But I've been a lifelong photographer. I started with Photoshop 2.5 back in college, so just before they introduced layers, and obviously that was a big deal. But all of college, I was going to school for photography, and it was all film back in the day, film and darkroom. And I worked as a commercial photographer. Then I owned a wedding and portrait studio. And actually, my wife and I still have a wedding and portrait studio here. That's actually where I'm at today, is upstairs in the office of the studio. But luckily, I sat on an airplane next to the right person, and next thing I knew, I became a product manager. If you guys aren't familiar with a product manager, they're someone who works in software. They interface with the customer. They kind of figure out what it is that they want, what are the problems that need to be solved, and then they kind of work with the engineers to come up with ways to solve those problems. And I started doing that, almost 20 years ago now. And, I started with ON1 15 or 16 years ago as kind of their first product manager. And when we started with Photoshop plugins only, and this is even before Lightroom was even a thing. Lightroom came out. We started to build plugins for Lightroom, plugins for Photoshop, plugins for more solutions. And then we ended up kind of turning those into standalone applications that address all the needs that photographers have today.
Yeah. And that's where we are. I mean, there's a bunch of things to talk about. So, looking at the website, I'm on the website now. There's all kinds of software that photographers go to the website and then sort of drool after, right? And the main, and correct me if I'm wrong, the main flagship app is the ON1 Photo Raw app, right? So take me into that world, or better yet, take me back and take me into the suite of apps. Which one came first? And then, the kind of supplementary lineup after that.
Sure. Well, when we started the company many, many years ago, we started off with some fairly well-known plugins. You guys may have heard of Photo Frame and Mask Pro and Photo Tools. We even did some Quark Express plugins way back when the company started. And, we kind of started to build our own tools, our own plugins that were unique and different for us. Of course, Genuine Fractals was one of our earliest plugins as well for resizing your photos. But the more that we built, the more our customers said, we just want to do everything in ON1. We love the way you guys build stuff so much that we don't want to have to use these other apps. So we built a browser, we kind of combined them together, and then probably 6 or 7 years ago, we came out with Photo Raw. We built our own raw processing engine from the ground up. It's all based in the GPU, so it's super fast, much faster than any of the raw processors at the time. And then that's kind of where Photo Raw came from. That was kind of the first all-in-one. It kind of combines, if you will, imagine if Photoshop and Lightroom had a baby, that would be Photo Raw. So it does all of the browsing, cataloging, all of your culling, all of your basic raw processing, all of your retouching, but then it also can do that on layered files. You can actually combine multiple raw photos together, still keeping it 100% non-destructive, when we've added effects and portrait retouching and sky replacement and pretty much everything else a photographer could ever want into a single platform.
I love that. You know what? I got to take a pause and just let you know that the This Week in Photo community, particularly our little private community, it turns out that I would say a good 85 to 90% of the photographers in there love cats. I've just got to tell you. So I'm just going to say, you just sold a bunch of, I don't know if it was strategic, but you just sold a bunch of software because of the cameo and the photobombing of that cat back there in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Carlos, one of our studio cats. We have 2 studio cats, and our dog Luna is hiding back there somewhere with my wife Whitney, who's also a photographer. So she's over there editing a job while we're talking. So
that is awesome. Hey, I was going to put that in there. So the TWiP folks that are listening to this, they know who I'm talking about. They love their cats. You know, our meetings are full of cats all the time. And dogs too. Dogs get equal treatment. So just back to the task at hand. So looking at the positioning of the software. So you mentioned a bunch of pieces of competing software out there, right? And competing technologies like sky replacement. You know, sky replacement showed up, and then now there's a lot of sky replacement out there. You guys have been in the game forever, like since before Lightroom, which is that's crazy. So where do you see ON1 fitting in the industry? Is it an alternative? Are you looking to become the next Adobe? Are you supplementary to Adobe, and you guys are in a friendly co-opetition type arrangement? Like, what's the positioning that you see that the company sits in?
That's a great question. The way that I think about it is we're a technology company and we're a photography company. So many of the guys who work there, like me, are photographers. We just want to build technologies that solve problems for photographers in unique and better ways. And we're going to put that out in whatever works for people. So that's why we started as a plugin company. That's why we still make plugins today. So a lot of those cool technologies will work in whatever you use. So if you use Photoshop, or you use Lightroom, or you use Capture One, or Affinity, or Corel, or Apple Photos, it doesn't matter. We take those great technologies, we make them available there. But then there's also people that kind of want it all in one platform, and they want to be able to have that non-destructive editing. And to get that true non-destructive editing, you have to kind of own the whole process from soup to nuts.
Pipeline.
Yeah. If there was a way that we could do that inside of Lightroom or those other apps, that'd be great. But no one's ever invented that capability. So it kind of forced our hand to go build a tool so that we could give the users what they wanted. They want to have that full-on layered non-destructive editing.
Yeah, and that's where it is. I mean, it's so interesting. I'm curious. One of the buzzwords in the industry over the past couple of years, 3-ish years, has been AI. Or buzz acronyms, right? Artificial intelligence has been out there, and with sky replacement, of course, being one of them, and different areas. Where does ON1 sit with that? Like in terms of artificial intelligence and in smartly incorporating it into software, where does it best fit in, and where do you see things going with artificial intelligence?
Oh, I could talk on that for a long time. So
bring it. Me too. This is exciting. I'm a nerd. I love this stuff.
For quite a long time. And, and AI is kind of a loaded term. There's a lot of different kinds of AI. A lot of what we think about today are going to be more, CNNs, convolutional neural networks, that are deep learning is another way to think about it. But there's other forms of AI, and we've been implementing those for years. We started off with, I think, our AI Quick Mask tool, which made it very simple to make a selection. Just kind of marked a little bit in green and a little bit in red, and it would automatically create a selection for you using AI. We also do some AI matching for improving kind of an auto tone sort of thing. Even our Lightroom migration tool, something we built many years ago, it helps you to migrate your catalog from Lightroom into Photo Raw, actually uses AI to determine the proper settings for all of the developed sliders. We're like the only tool, knock on wood, that I can think of today that'll actually transfer your Lightroom photos over with all of the non-destructive settings from Lightroom in place. So if you've gone in and you've made adjustments to the color and tone, and you've done local adjustments or retouching in Lightroom, all of that transfers over to Photo Raw, and we use AI to do that because obviously the algorithms for basic raw processing are different between our app and Lightroom. So, shadow slider of 10 in Lightroom doesn't mean a shadow slider of 10 in our app. We have to actually look at the results and come up with what the proper results or the proper slider positions would be. So today, that AI has gone a lot further. So, we have done no noise AI for reducing noise that actually uses convolutional neural networks to do that. We've built portrait AI for automatically finding faces and giving the ability to smooth the skin, enhance the eyes, enhance the mouth, and do all of that work automatically. And our newest one, Resize AI, that'll be coming out very soon, which is kind of the next generation of resize or genuine fractals for upscaling or interpolating your photos. So those are all different types of AI. But what it really comes down to is we want to make it easier for a photographer to get better looking work. Our goal is not to replace the creativity or to take over the creativity anytime that we deploy AI. It's to either take something that's boring and hard to do, like masking or scaling, making that easier and faster for users, or it's to unlock creative potential that's hard to do. Now, something like sky replacement, when you do it right, it can look realistic and believable and adds to the photo and doesn't subtract from the photo. So we want to give users the ability to do that and make what was a good photo a great photo.
Yeah.
Does that kind of answer your question?
That does. Yeah. I mean, we're going, and that's my definition of AI too. It's to take the things that we don't like doing, or any technology, right? Is to make the things that are hard, time consuming, or in other words, we put them at the bottom of the list of things that we have to do and automate those and make those easier. And like you mentioned, sky replacement. Yeah. Unless you are a channel wizard and you understand the Bezier path tool and doing all that stuff. And even then, it was hard to get realistic looking, perfect type masks. But if you throw horsepower of a computer at it and you're, like you said, machine learning and have it do that intelligence separation, boom, now you have a photo that ordinarily would have been okay. Now it's amazing, right? Because you can change the shot in there. Yeah. You mentioned,
and it goes beyond just the mask. You just having a great mask for the sky isn't going to do it, because it has to actually blend with the foreground correctly. So you actually have to look at the sky, understand what the sky looks like, understand the foreground, and make adjustments to the foreground so the two blend together and look realistic. So even a mask is a good start, but it isn't the end of when it comes to replacing skies at all.
Yeah, no, for sure. You mentioned the algorithm, like the raw processing algorithm. I want to talk about that a little bit, because obviously that's part of what you guys do, right? Is to take those zeros and ones, decode them, make a image that our gray matter can discern as something. So when you look at that, when I look at the math that goes into these raw processing algorithms, like from a user standpoint, it's hard for me to understand what's different between the different platforms. So we've got, like you mentioned, Adobe with Camera Raw, which is also in Lightroom, Photoshop. We've got, all the other players out there that are able to decode RAW all the way down from Apple, all of them, right, can do it. What's different in ON1? Like, is there a secret sauce in there, or are all of you guys pulling from a library from camera manufacturers that say this is how you decode our files? Have at it, add your salt and pepper to it, but this is the basic. How does that work?
I wish the camera manufacturers would do that. They don't. It's all very, very secret and very difficult to do. So, when you take that raw photo, there's several stages. First, you have to just decode it. Oftentimes it's compressed. So you have to uncompress it and decode it so that you actually have data you can work with. Then you have to debar it or demosaic, and that's the process of actually taking that raw data and turning it from a single grayscale image into a 3-channeled RGB image, and then what you have right there is going to look very flat and ugly and green. You then have to apply the proper corrections to that to make it look like a pleasing photo, and that's what everybody in raw processing has to do. The problem is there's not necessarily a perfect formula for doing that. There's lots of things along that way where you can kind of do it your own way. There's different debarring algorithms, different denoising, different sharpening. The curves and the color primaries that are used can vary. Some of that's included in the raw photos from make to make, some are not. So, a lot of that just comes down to shooting lots of samples and making adjustments so we get what we think are good looking results out of it. For us, one of the big differences is performance is super important to us. So like I mentioned, we do everything in the GPU. And the better the GPU you have, the better, I should say better results, the faster you're going to get those results. When it comes to browsing your photos, it's going to be a lot faster. We don't require that you catalog all your photos. Most other apps out there, you have to go through this cataloging process, which you come back from a shoot, you got 3,000 photos, you stick it in there to catalog, you got to wait for it to ingest all those before you can actually do any work. We don't do that. You can just put the pictures on your hard drive and you can start to browse and work with them right away. So it's very fast to get in, see your work, do your basic culling before you actually get in to do any real processing.
Now, are there any little bits in there, and the bits of data that are included in the raw file that you guys aren't able to see? And I literally don't know. For example, I have a Nikon camera here, right? This guy, which I'm very proud of. Mm-hmm. I'm very happy with this guy, right? So, yeah, that's a Z6 II. So we have that camera, just going to generate Nikon raw files to it. And are there any bits of data that are included in that raw file that you can't see, like lens characteristic information or different things like that need to be decoded? Or do you get access to everything that's recorded when I click that shutter button?
It's a bit of both. It kind of depends on the camera and the make and what is in there. Some of it's recorded in kind of standard fields that are easy to read. Some are recorded in what's called the maker note, which is another area where the manufacturer can stick metadata. Sometimes that's encrypted, sometimes it's not. For our uses, we can get just about everything that we need out of it. All of the information about the lens and the lens settings that we use so that we can do proper lens correction. There are some things that are there that we haven't chosen to do yet. For example, if you shoot the camera using a specific camera profile, we don't automatically pick that. The user can go in and pick that. That's something that we could do, but we just haven't done that. Or doing things like in-camera crop. That's another thing where we just we'll decode the whole file rather than apply an in-camera crop to it. But a lot of that's just based on feedback from our users. If we get a lot of users that say they want those features, we can certainly add those to it. Yeah,
I love it. It's so much fun. I love this stuff. It's so much fun. The power that companies like ON1 give photographers. I come from photography from back in the literally rolling your own black and white film into the canister, shooting it, processing it, putting on the reel, dip and duck. So I'm back from that. So you look at where things were then, and we thought that was state of the art, right? It's state of the art what we're doing. And we look at what companies like ON1, what you're doing, it's literal alchemy, the things that we can do now with images, notwithstanding the sensors and the cameras and all that. So on that, that was a clever segue for me. On that, you guys have resizing software. So talking about sensor sizes and resolution and all that. I also shoot micro four thirds. So I have full frame Nikons, full frame Panasonic, and micro four thirds. In fact, I'm on a micro four thirds camera right now. The one of the dings that micro four thirds gets is, hey, the sensor size is too small. You're never going to be able to blow up beautiful images like I can with full frame. You're a hobbyist, yada yada yada. Does your resize software mitigate that argument? In other words, Am I able to now blow up my images that are shot on micro four thirds or even my phone to saleable levels that are competitive with full frame?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. AI, the kind of recent generation of AI, a lot of the newer, more deep learning models that have come out over the last few years are really just unlocking things that we could never do before. No noise is a good example. That's something you do at the very beginning of your workflow for reducing noise, and then resize at the opposite end, at the bookend, to prepare it for printing. The way it works is, let's see if I can describe this. So normally when you take a photo and you blow it up, if you do this in Photoshop or a traditional way, it kind of looks at a block of pixels and it averages those and inserts a new pixel of that color. So everything grows together. So what used to be a very sharp edge becomes a larger, more diffuse edge. So that's one of the problems you get when you try to take one of those smaller files from an older camera or a significant crop or something where micro four thirds. It might not be as big. When you try to blow it up, everything gets softer, and then you have to try to sharpen it to try to counteract that.
Right.
Resize AI is very different. It actually uses an AI model. It can analyze the photo. It can understand the textures that make up the photo, and then can recreate that detail. It's essentially increasing the resolution of the file. It's pretty crazy. what it can do. So it can take those small files. I've done a lot of photos that are in the 2,000 pixels on the long side size. Something that would be from like let's say in like an iPhone 3, for example. Fairly old stuff, and you can blow those up much larger. You can make a 16 by 20 print from those that, from a standard viewing distance, would look pretty good.
Okay, what's happening though? When you're doing that, what's happening? Because like you said, most photographers are familiar with interpolation, right? Where you stretch something out and the software will average what it thinks should be in between those pixels and blow it up, but you end up with fuzzy, kind of out of focus or soft images that aren't crisp and beautiful, right? But you're not doing that. Is there some sort of fractal math going in there? Like what's happening? So what's happening to the extent that you can share trade secrets? What's happening when you stretch it out and you got pixel A and pixel C? How do you get to the spaces in between without making the whole thing fall apart?
Yeah. That's actually the really cool thing about AI. It's funny you mentioned fractals. That's actually the way genuine fractals used to work, which was kind of the gold standard for this for like the last 20 years. Is it would look at a photo, it would use fractals to make essentially like think of it like a vector framework or a fractal framework. It could scale up. That would keep the edges sharp. But when it came to filling into textures, which oftentimes to our eye is the most important part of it, it would still kind of end up using bicubic to do that. So you get softer textures with harder edges. So it's better than what you can do with bicubic, but not nearly as good as what you can do using AI. With AI, we essentially train it with millions of samples from photos. So it sees lots of examples of all the different textures and all the different edges in the world. And then its job is to recreate those at any scale. So it can essentially blow the photo up, and then it could look at that area and say, that's feathers, or that's fur, or that's tree bark, or that's rock. And then it can fill it in with the proper texture at the scale that you're going to. So it's pretty crazy.
So
kind of frankly magic to me too. So.
That is, it's a kind of magic, right? That's interesting. So it can fill in. So if I take a picture of a brick pattern on a wall, right, with a relatively small sensor camera, and I know that my client needs it to be X size, and Photoshop's resized by cubic or whatever is not going to do it. What your software will do is when I scale that up, it's going to say, hey, that's brick. And I know brick looks like this, and I'm going to is it using that brick looks like this texture and putting it in there? Or is it saying, hey, computer, draw some texture that looks similar to this brick that I know what brick looks like? How's that happening under the hood?
It's more like the latter. So, for example, it's not just stamping an existing brick pattern over the brick is that, because that wouldn't be very believable. Obviously, the scale would be off. You couldn't just stick in a very small brick pattern. It has to honor the pattern of the brick, but it understands even deeper than that, the texture of the brick, the texture of the mortar, and can actually refine the edges and put the proper kind of that microscopic texture on those things so they look realistic.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. So what else? What else is ON1 working on? So you guys clearly you have a team of like 3,000 people working on the resize software. You got a team of engineers doing RAW, right? As these new cameras keep coming out with different RAW formats and different capabilities and all that. What else? What else are you putting your horsepower on?
We were really focusing on those problems that are really hard to solve. For us, obviously, we have our existing tools. We need to maintain and continue to improve those. And one of the ways that we can do that is to kind of look at overarching problems that are difficult for people and come up with ways to make those better. So without tipping our hand too much, one of the things that people love about our products is our masking capabilities. We have a very flexible, very powerful set of masking tools that all work together. You can kind of look at the newer versions of Lightroom and some of the things that they've done with masking. We've been doing all that for 10 years already. So that area around masking of having to create complex masks is still a difficult area. And I think that's something that we can make a lot better for users. So. Yeah.
And that was, traditionally, right, that back in Photoshop 2.5, 3, 4 days, right, being able to do masks was an alchemy. You remember back in the day, Kai's photo tools and Kai Kraus and all that, right? He was the Steve Jobs of pixels, dropping those different pieces of software out, and people would just get excited and hang on his every word. But I remember he had put out a series, I think it was him, it was either him or Guy Kawasaki, had put out a series called Chops, channel operations, right? It was a series of text-based articles on the early web that step by step showed you how to do different things, like how do you get a glossy liquidish texture, how do you do this, how do you do that, and as long as you follow them, like create the shape, blur it, cut this out, do this, you would end up at the end of it with something that looked pretty cool. Fast forward to today, now we have the power of ON1. We can do all these kinds of things. And masking was one of the things that they talked about back then of, okay, this is, you got to, if you want to select something, you do this and you blur it, then you use this command to do this. And at the end of it, you might have a mask that you can then load in that will, allow you to put stuff behind it. So you guys are doing all that, but in a click, right? Take me into that a little bit more, because that part of it, I want people to understand how important that is. Just the power of masking and having control over a scene, not just the sky replacement stuff, but being able to say, hey, I have this picture of Dan in his studio, I want to put something else behind him. Yeah. That even in a shot like this of you would not be easy, right? With the glasses and the hair and all this stuff, that would not be easy. But in your world, it's relatively straightforward. Take me through that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you kind of give me shivers thinking of the old days of Photoshop back where you used to have to like take a channel and duplicate the channel and then go into quick mask mode and mask on it and then save that as a selection. People always wonder, why is there that save selection command in Photoshop? I would never need that anymore. And then you'd have to load that selection in because you didn't even have layer masks back in the day. So,
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, so when it comes to masking in Photo Raw, everything is non-destructive in Photo Raw, and it's the same in our other apps that are kind of spawned off of Photo Raw, like Effects and Portrait. There's lots of different ways that you can use masks and create masks. They're used at every filter level, every layer level, every adjustment layer that you add. All those have a mask, and each mask has a huge number of capabilities. You can start off with a luminosity mask, for example. It's a very popular thing to do. You'll start with a luminosity mask, but then we give you global masking tools to soften that mask, or to think of it like a layers or a curves adjustment on that luminosity mask so that you can actually push it to be lighter or darker, to target lighter or darker ranges, or you can even create a window. Well, let's say you only want it to affect the midtones. You can essentially bring in clipping sliders from each side that will clip off the highlights and the shadows, so you're only affecting a certain window, and you can move that window around. So you can highly target different tones that way, but you can also do color range masks, and you can then use any of the localized tools. There's flexible gradients. We were actually the first company to have a truly re-editable flexible gradient. In Photoshop, you kind of make a gradient. It's very difficult to go back and adjust it, where with ours, you can adjust it in 3D at any time. Wow. Along with brushes, along with our perfect brush, which detects color as you paint, making it very easy to do intricate things. Our air quick mask, all of those all work together, and you can use them in any order that you want, and you can copy and paste those from layer to layer or object to object. So it's a very, very flexible, very powerful way to do localized adjustments.
Who do you see as the customer? The main customer avatar for ON1? Is it the beginning photographer, the amateur, the advanced amateur, or professionals that are doing what you guys are doing there? Working on wedding work and all that sort of stuff. Who's the target?
Honestly, anybody with a love of photography is someone that we want to work with. When I talk with our customers, most of them are advanced amateurs. They're people who have been in photography for years. Probably a third of them are professionals, or at least make some money at their job with photography. But they're really just people who are passionate about photography and are willing to put in the craftsmanship involved to make a great photo.
Yeah.
They're not guys who are looking for a one-click, solution that are going to do everything for them automatically. They want to be in control. They want to create something cool. And that's really what they use ON1 for.
And that's a photographer, right? I mean, there's people that make photos, right? You could take your phone and aim it at something, and it's going to use all its computational photography and give you an image that is a great representation of the thing that you were looking at, which is great. But that's not a photographer. I think a photographer is somebody who thinks about the composition, the scene itself, what they want to do with it, captures the shot, then takes that shot back and realizes and pushes it to the next level of what they had in their mind's eye. That's the photographer that captures and then develops and then shares, not capture and share, I think.
classic pre-visualization, and I'm always amazed. I work closely with a lot of our users, and at some point they kind of hit this tipping point where they start to learn what they could do in ON1, and that becomes part of their pre-visualization process. Yeah. And they already know what they're going to do before they do it. They actually are in the camera and say, all right, I know that if I use a local adjustment here and I apply a dynamic contrast here, and they've already thought in advance what they're going to do with that photo before they even push the button. And those are the guys that just create amazing work.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you got to know your tools. If you know your tools and you know what your tools are capable of, it becomes part of the workflow. The pre-visualization, right? If I know, if I know I have these superpowers, I can leverage those when I go out to fight crime, right? So,
with great power comes great responsibility.
It does, absolutely. And we do have great power, right? Because we have all this software, and then we have a way to get our images out, and millions of people can see them instantly. Back in the day, when we're talking about film and processing and printing, we could spend all day perfecting an image in the dark room and be proud of it, but only a half a dozen people are going to see it in the end, right? And you're one of them. So all those times have changed. So we have power and distribution. I know. I want to wrap up here with a couple of different directions. The first is mobile. So obviously, I'm sure mobile's on your roadmap, and as these phones that Apple's putting out and, all the other players are putting out, they're getting better and better and doing all these magical things that we could never have even conceived of before. What is ON1 doing to kind of help those people that are shooting with mobile and taking mobile more seriously going forward?
Yeah. So one of the best kept secrets about ON1 is that there actually is a mobile app. And it actually integrates with the desktop version. It's called, we call it Cloud Sync. When you get the subscription version of Photo Raw, you have the ability to take any of your photos and publish them so that they're viewable and editable on all of your devices, including your mobile devices for Android and iOS. And there's a companion mobile app that goes along with that allows you to take photos. They have great built-in camera apps that give you the kind of manual focus, manual exposure controls that photographers need. They shoot raw, and then those photos actually go up to the cloud and back to your desktop computer so that you can view and edit them from anywhere. So it's a great way to share your portfolio across multiple devices. It's a great way to shoot in the field and get your photos back to your desktop computers. The cool thing about it is it doesn't require that all your originals live in the cloud. It actually creates what we call a proxy. It's essentially a proprietary, smaller version that maintains all of the raw information, all of the tonal range, and all the detail you would in the raw file, but takes up a lot less space so that we can shuttle it around between computers and devices a lot faster. So, yeah, I love it. I have all of my photos. I'm a heavy deleter. I'm from the old, shooting slides days. So you only kept your best work by about 13,000 photos that, I can view and edit from any of my devices. So that's pretty handy to be able to do.
Wow, that's so cool. So all bases are covered. And then the other side of that is video, right? So are there any plans to move into the video space? Because I want everything you're doing, including resize, everything. I want it available to me on video as well, so that I could do these kinds of magic tricks with moving pixels over 60 frames a second in 4K or 8K. When's that coming? Can I get that?
That is a great question. Gosh, how do I answer that? We have had interest in video, and it's an area that we've looked at in the past. But to be honest, we're all old-fashioned still photographers, and that's our love, that's our passion, that's what we know. Those are the problems that we solve. If you've ever shot weddings, there's the photographer and there's the videographer. They're two completely separate skills, and the way you approach the scene, the way you do things are completely different. The way that you solve the problems are different. So I think if we go down the video road, we would really have to rethink a lot of the paradigms of the things that we do to really make it fit a videographer's workflow better. And to be honest, videographers have pretty darn good tools out there compared to what photographers have.
Yeah, you're right. I remember I was Air Force. I was a combat photojournalist in the Air Force, and I remember our unit had the still photographers, and we thought we were vastly superior to the video guys over there that had to carry around their giant video gear and do edit and all this stuff. But we were running around with our Nikons and film and all that stuff. So yeah, there was always this: my art form is better than your art form, and they would say, well, we can tell stories, we can make people cry with video, we could do all this, and we'd say, well,
I can do that with a picture.
I could do that with a photo, plus I could just hang my photo on the wall and it doesn't require any power. Can you do that?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So
you see photographs in museums. You don't see a lot of video in museums.
Not yet. Yeah, for sure. Well, cool.
I'm sure
well,
we're going to get a lot of hate mail for that. So
yeah. Well, you know where to direct it. Dan, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate you coming on and chatting and being so open about the stuff that you guys are working on. If people want to dive in, obviously you can go to on1.com to look at all the things that are available. But if they're interested in learning more about the software and sort of diving in before they commit and press buy, where's a good location for them to kind of marinate in the world of ON1?
Actually, I would do it all at ON1. Actually, we have a huge library of video tutorials. I think there's over 800 tutorials that cover every topic you can imagine, and they're from very basic, getting started, all the way up to advanced tutorials that you have access to on the website. So I would go there, download a trial. That's the best way to do it. There's a free 2-week trial of every product. You can download it and give it a try.
All right, excellent. All right, so we'll leave it right there. Dan, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. Thanks for having me.
This is TWiP.